Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and that's New Comic Book Day, or at least it once was, when men in their late 30s with beards below their collarbones would waddle to their LCS, their local comic shop, and stand in front of the new release racks reading everything that was new without intending to buy anything or move out of the way of the people who were intending to buy things. And that was a somewhat sickly but enjoyable weekly ritual that I was part of for a long time myself. And the reason I say once was is because it looks to me like that ritual is over. The international pandemic caused most municipalities to shut down non-essential businesses, to order them to close. And that definitely includes comic shops. And the reason why that kills the traffic at new comic issues is because you won't find your comic books at bookstores or at supermarkets anymore, or drugstores or anything like that. They were, a while ago, a long time ago, an arrangement was made where they were sold only to specialty shops, only to comic shops, by one distributor, Diamond Distributors. So when those shops were told you have to close, there was nowhere else where you could get new comics. And then in addition to that, Diamond Distributors announced that they weren't going to distribute comics anymore, that they were themselves shutting, ostensibly because of this pandemic, although they're not paying people either, and they're laying people off, all sorts of that caused the two major superhero comic book publishers, Marvel and DC, to issue a pencils down order to their artists and writers, saying, we're not going to pump a whole lot of life into digital comics, so if you're working on a comic for the summer, stop what you're doing, because we're not moving ahead with any of that. And that is, all of that taken together is amazing. It really is amazing. Little comic shops that were the only places where you could get the weekly superhero comics are going to go out of business in droves. Most of them were living hand to mouth as it is. And now they're being asked to pay their rents, their mortgages, their insurance and whatnot, month in and month out without any money coming in. Most of them can't do that. Most of them, even if their region's quarantine is eased or lifted, they won't be able to go back into business. And also there's a larger question, a question that has come up on all areas of the spectrum of the comic book world, both in print and here on YouTube. There's an active comic book presence all across the, unfortunately, political spectrum. Unfortunately, that percolates everywhere. You can't get away from it, even in comics. With a lot of those people on all ends of that spectrum speculating on the larger thing that could end, not just comic shops as we know them, not just the superhero comics that have been going on for 80 years, but also the interest. The interest. It's been floated around comic book YouTube channels and comic book articles in the comic book press that it doesn't take long to dehabituate someone. It doesn't take long for someone to just drop an old habit. Those people, those 30-something neck-bearded virgins, went to comic book shops out of habit. They'd always done it, and they probably always would. But if it's not possible anymore, if you make them stop doing it, well, who's to say they'll start up again, even when it's possible? I don't know. I don't have any idea. I don't think the comic shop is I think the comic shop is like a lot of other retail businesses and like a lot of us, in that it's still psychologically reeling, just not really knowing, not really being able to think about what all of this actually means. And as a result, not really coming to grips with the fact that I think this 80-year tradition might be over. As amazing as that is for me to think, that I have lived long enough to see a time when there are no more Superman comics. No more Avengers. That seems amazing to me. I remember in the wake of a DC Comics super event called Crisis on Infinite Earths, the company suspended publication of Superman comics. DC Presents, Action Comics, Superman. They suspended publication for 3 months while they revamped everything, while they redid everything. And that felt weird. That felt really weird. But this is a suspension, but it's all comics, and it's indefinitely. That is just amazing to me. Just amazing to me to think that if life ever goes back to a semblance of normal, for instance, here in Boston, not the same normal. Now, there are some industries that I don't imagine can bounce back at all. Restaurants being one of the foremost one of them. I don't see how you do restaurants or movie theaters again. At all. Because this is not going to go away. We're going to get better at dealing with it. It's going to become part of our lives. But it's not going to go away, this new infection that's going to be hospitalizing people and killing people for the foreseeable future. And that is going to blossom at certain periods, slack off at certain periods, but one way or another, it's going to require a bunch of new adaptations, social adaptations. And some things might be able to survive that. Like, for instance, if we all start wearing face masks in public, then I imagine retail stores could resume operation, some kind of operation, maybe even normal operation. They could maybe do it. But restaurants, movie theaters, where I don't know. But comic shops would fail for a different reason entirely. They might fail just because what was declared non-essential by states and municipalities is then subsequently recognized as non-essential by its own consumers. I don't know how it's going to work, but one way or another, on this channel, I used to love showing you the new comics that I would get on Wednesday. And I don't do that anymore. My LCS, my local comic shop, like everybody else's local comic shop in Boston, closed a month ago. And it's not just that. It's not just that. This is all weird for me too. I haven't been to Boston proper in over a month. And when I was living in this country, not traveling abroad, that's the longest I've ever gone. It's amazing. I still live in greater Boston, but I'm talking about the city of Boston. I'm talking about, the Brattle Bookshop in downtown Crossing. I'm talking about Copley Square and the library. I haven't been to Boston, my favorite place in the world, in a month. And have no plans to go there anytime soon. But I used to do comic book releases on this channel, and it feels wrong not to, especially since a lot of you have emailed me and said that comic books are about all you have the mental speed for these days, and that you'd like actually to hear more, not less. So I will gladly do that. I will gladly make a comic book video on Wednesdays and Fridays for you. But Wednesday feels like a day to talk about comics, and I don't have any new comics to talk about. I haven't tried Comixology. If those of you who are, I'm assuming only comic book fans watch these videos, and I've heard a lot about Comixology from comic review channels. I'm wondering, are any of you tried it? Do you like it? It's apparently a really popular digital venue for comics, for new releases. And I don't know how it works. I'll look it up, but and find out the details of it. But I'd love to know the personal reactions. Do you give it a thumbs up? Comixology. Should I look into that? But in the meantime, I've been going through my back issues. And like all comic book fans, over time, I have assembled back issues. I have them in the long white cardboard long boxes. I don't have 50 of those long boxes weighing 70 tons. I don't have 20 of those long boxes. I do have a few, though. They're really handy for furniture in addition to storing comics. And I've been just going through those, and I'm not planning it. My comic book back issues are in no better organizational shape than my books are. So I've just been going. I have one box that I'm working my way through. I just go in and pick out a handful to talk about those, and the comic book fans among you have seemed to like that. So I thought we'd do that today. We'll just go through another stack of comics. Those of you who are organizationally minded, who are a little bit on the anal side, you should be forewarned. There is no order here. There may be a run of issues from one title that are together, and then you jump a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades. I've been buying comics for a very, very, very long time. Marvel Comics as long as Marvel Comics has been around, and DC Comics for almost that long. So don't expect much in the way of order. So what have we got for this first batch? Okay. All right, first batch is a large batch of things. Great. And this we've seen before. These are written by a writer named Priest. His pen name is Priest. And they are drawn by Ramon Bernardo, who I think is fantastic. I'll show you some of his artwork. And this is Justice League Task Force that came out about 30 years ago, and where it's a spin-off of the Justice League led by the Martian Manhunter, in which the various characters wear... I wonder if I can give you an example. Where they wear, the various characters wear vests. They wear a task force vest, TF vest. I wonder if I can get you an example of what the cute little vests look like. That seems to be one. Yeah, there we. Well, no. I want it to be a little clearer than that. The writer assembled a team of characters. There we go. See, they wear these little non-functional vests. The writer assembled a team of various characters. The Martian Manhunter was known. The writer also took one of the characters from one of the most despised runs of the Justice League. So it's something that I had a great deal of fun mocking. There was one particular run of the Justice League where the Martian Manhunter and Aquaman assembled a team living on the streets, man. They wanted to reconnect with the people. They don't want to be on a satellite in orbit anymore. They wanted to be part of the neighborhood. They had an absolutely pathetic team that included two of the most pathetic characters. One was called Vibe. He had vaguely sonic powers that apparently only activated when he was breakdancing with his boombox. And one was called Gypsy, who dressed like a stereotypical European gypsy, the stereotype of a European gypsy, and whose superpower was to blend in with her background. In other words, her superpower was that she was really, really good at hiding. The rest of the team was largely equally pathetic. They had the Martian Manhunter, they had the Sorceress Zatanna, they had Aquaman. They had a bunch of other third stringers, and the fans didn't particularly approve. I didn't particularly approve. But this writer, Priest, resurrected Gypsy and actually renovated her, did really good with her, and then added a bunch of other characters, including one who was retconned into DC continuity, so he was invented in the 90s, but we were told that he'd been around forever and that he'd been in suspended animation for a while. He has vague, stupid energy-related powers, and he himself is just resentment. That is his character. It wasn't a promising team, but the writer, Priest, did a great job with the characters, and the artwork is incredible. This is the first of these. That is the character Damage on the cover there. He's a teenage boy who periodically loses control of himself and explodes all over everything. With energy powers. I don't know what the rest of you are thinking. And one of the main arcs that ran through all of these issues was the Justice League villain Despero, who was sort of renovated as a superhero character. That is Despero. Tiny little head. And there were let's see here, I'll just keep showing you the issues. There's another Task Force issue. The first 20 issues of these, or maybe 15 issues of Task Force, Justice League Task Force, were collected, and I think there were plans to collect the rest of them as well. I would love that. I would love to have these issues in a book instead of in these individual issues. There's one series here, one miniseries in here where they go back in time and they go to the world of Warlord, the character Warlord, who we've seen in other comic book days. And there's one of them starts off, this is Priest and Bernardo, one of them starts off in this vaguely prehistoric world with a character who looks very familiar. It looks like that might be Conan. He's not identified that way, but nevertheless, it doesn't matter, because he's saying stealing this eye is a fool's errand, requiring not so much skill as stealth. I hardly need a regiment. After all, what could go wrong? And what happens next is that a spaceship squashes him and his horse. And the spaceship, one of the characters who's he's aligned with the Justice League Task Force, you got a 6-panel page. He opens up the door, looks out at the squashed horses. This is probably not good. And these just continue. There is in the world of Warlord, with the old lettering style of Warlord's title, that this whole adventure in Scartaris is really good, really, really enjoyable, well worth being reprinted in a book. And then at issue number 37, the whole thing came to an end. There's the Martian Manhunter floating there pensively, and there are all the cutesy poo vests. They don't have people in them anymore. They're just, the vests are just floating around. Whatever happened to that old Justice League Task Force merch? I don't know. I don't know what happened to those vests. But anyway, that was Justice League Task Force. I'm pretty sure that's all I have. There's one other issue that's probably floating around miscellaneously. Samantha Bean, what you doing? Want to see your fans? Huh? Ooh. Where's the little baby? Who's the little baby? Hmm? Oh, who are all those people? They like you more than they like me. I think you're the cutest. You are the cutest. Yes, you may notice a tiny amount more definition on the Bean's face. That is because World War III happened yesterday, and for 5 minutes I clipped her facial fur. The fur on your head, the fur in the back of the whiskers here to make them stick out and to have less fuzz directly under the ear. The landing strip in between her massive eyebrows. I used clippers to clip all of that, and she very much doesn't like that. Very much doesn't. Do you? You don't like that at all. And she doesn't like it this much with me. I can just imagine what she'd be like if I sent her to an actual groomer. I will never do that. Never. But anyway, let's move on. Let's move on with comics. So this next one is an event. It was a genuine event. It was a massive sale thing. It was touted to be massively collectible. It sold millions and millions of copies. This is a relaunch of X-Men with Jim Lee. This is X-Men #1. There were multiple first issue covers. This was just, didn't care about it then, didn't care about it now. So I just got the one that was at the comic shop. And this has extremely detailed Jim Lee artwork. Look at that. Just gorgeous. Just fantastic. And it's written by Chris Claremont, as you will be able to tell, because it is all prose all the time. The characters talk in paragraphs, and they just go on and on talking about it in paragraphs, and it can get a little wearying, but I like the issue generally. I mean, look at all that conversation, look at all that talk, people talking in great big blocks. I liked the team. I liked the characters that Claremont chose to put in this book. A good mixture of new X-Men and old X-Men. I like the fact that he starts off this massive first storyline with Magneto, the X-Men's signature villain, signature morally questionable character. I enjoyed this a lot, and I kept reading this run of X-Men. But that X-Men #1 was a collector's bonanza. Everybody wanted the whole run of all the covers. They wanted everything that they could get, and that run has also been collected. Most of these things have been collected, like for instance this is from do I even want to know, 1973. This is from 1973. This is written by Len Wein and drawn by the great Gil Kane. This is Marvel Team Up #14. Marvel Team Up was a comic book that came out every other month or every month, where Spider-Man teamed up with a different character every month. Usually it was Spider-Man. Sometimes the focus went to two completely different characters. And it had a sister comic, Marvel 2-in-1, where the Thing from the Fantastic Four teamed up with one character after another. It wouldn't be that way now. If Marvel did team-ups now, it would be Deadpool and Wolverine who would do the teaming up. But at the time, Spider-Man and the Thing were two guaranteed everyman characters. That's what made these books so good, is that, for instance, you couldn't have a team-up book with the Submariner teaming up with someone every month, because the Submariner is not an everyman character. He's an arrogant prick. And the same thing is true with lots of other characters, whether they be arrogant or whatever. They're not template characters. They're not everymen, like Ben Grimm and like Peter Parker. So, and that was kind of the appeal of these things. And this is just a one-and-done story where Spider-Man teams up with the Submariner with this beautiful Gil Kane artwork. Look at that. Lovely. Of course, it annoyed me at the time, back in the 1970s, and it still does. Spider-Man wouldn't last very long in a fight against Prince Namor, but that's okay. Prince Namor had his own book at the time, so I was up for it. This next one is also a team-up book, but we cross companies. We go to DC, the home of Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman. And DC also, at the time, in the 70s, had two team-up books, The Brave and the Bold, starring Batman and a monthly guest star, and DC Presents, starring Superman and a monthly guest star. And that was a team-up, that was in addition to World's Finest, in which Superman and Batman teamed up every month. But then 20, 25, 30 years passed, and then DC revived The Brave and the Bold as a team-up book, and sort of, for a little while anyway, gloriously mixed things up so that characters would team up, but it wasn't always just the same anchor character. Although this issue is written by Mark Waid, it's drawn by the great Jerry Ordway, and in this issue, Batman teams up with the original version of the Flash. So not Barry Allen, but Jay Garrick, who fought crime during the 1940s. And this is very good. It's very witty, and it also plays very well on the fact that Jay Garrick is an older generation of superhero, and that maybe Wade is very sensitive in pointing out that Batman's urban ninja scare the crap out of you shtick not only wouldn't work on that earlier generation of heroes, but that Batman himself wouldn't try it on them, that he would respect them enough to view them as just colleagues or maybe even mentors. That is it's not hit very heavily in this issue, but it's done really well. It's a believable way that Batman would respond to a superpowered older character. Which I read an issue like this, and I'm all the more sorry that DC has mucked up its continuity so bad that at the present moment, I don't even know if in DC's continuity at the moment, what there is of it. There can't be a DC continuity if there are no DC comic books. I don't even know if in current DC comics there were superheroes fighting bad guys during World War II, and if the Jay Garrick Flash was one of them. I have no idea. But there's also a Batman issue, or maybe it was a Brave and Bold issue, where Batman teams up with the original Green Lantern, who was in Gotham City. He was the Gotham City guardian hero before Batman was born. And the dynamic there, I forget who wrote that issue, but the dynamic there was really good as well. Oh my, okay. All right, now we go back to 1975. This is Detective Comics number 446. This was a Batman title. You had Batman, you had Brave and Bold, you had Detective Comics. And this is written by Len Wein. Yes, and drawn by the great Jim Aparo. Jim Aparo just could do no wrong. Look at that. Oh, my God. Look at that panel. Incredible. And at the end of this issue, this was during a very brief arc in which Batman is wanted by the police. I mean, he's always had a kind of an uneasy vigilante relationship with the police, but Commissioner Gordon is usually the figure there to smooth that out. But for a little while, he's wanted for murder. In the 70s, in his comic books, he's wanted for murder, and the cops are instructed to apprehend him or to shoot him on sight. And at the end of this issue, it's a great moment. There's a cop who has Batman directly in his sights, and he lets him go. And the other cop says, "In heaven's name, Kelly, you had the Batman dead in your sights. Why didn't you shoot?" And the Officer Kelly says, "I tried hard to, Harris. Honest to God, I tried. But I took a good long look at his face, and I just couldn't pull the trigger. Could you?" And notice he's not asking his fellow cop. He's looking at the reader. That is just awesome. That is just, he lets Batman go, and he says, "Could you?" And then there's an ill-advised backup feature in which Hawkman has a fight with a villain in a playground. has rather a lot more trouble with one particular thug, one ordinary guy, one goon in a children's playground than you would expect Hawkman to have. But you take your backup features where you get Ed Rich Buckler artwork. And then we have a miniseries. Oh God. Those of you who are extra anal are not going to like this. I have numbers 2, 3, and 4 of 4. Number 1 of 4 must be somewhere, but it's not with these. And it was a mini-series about Nexus. It was by Mike Barron and Steve Rude, and it was The Wages of Sin. And this is number 2. These beautiful painted covers by Steve Rude, by Rude the Dude. There's number 3. And there's number 4. And these are great. These star Nexus and his massive supporting cast, and they have Steve Rude's artwork at just its absolute finest. Let's see here. The number 2 has an original back cover painting, but the others don't. The others just have our ads on the back. But let me see if I can give you an example of what Rude's artwork was like when it was at its most antic, because it's so good. Well, okay. I picked an issue that's a little on the creepy side. Here, let me find one that isn't. Let me find one that's a little more antic. Because when he is antic, when he likes to fill a panel with things, then here we go. Look at all that's going on there. It's just amazing. All that's going on panels like that. This is an artist who's perfectly happy to have things be cartoony. But that these books are nevertheless can be very serious. Just delightful stuff. I should really, when I'm done with these, a long time from now, at the end of this year, when I'm done with this back issue tour, I really should go through and organize these things. I know some of you are howling that now, but I should have all my Nexus issues together, just so I know what Nexus I have and what I don't. I was a huge Nexus fan, just huge. Followed the character through almost every incarnation, from the old, very early, very inept black and white stuff that was practically done on a dime, to these latest things done with the best technology, the artist and the writer both having grown over time, so that everything is much more beautiful. Okay, all right. This is an issue of one incarnation of Adventure Comics, starring the Legion of Superheroes. So we have a main story about Mon-El and a backup story. The main story concentrates on one of the strangest members of the Legion of Superheroes. This is a superhero team of superpowered teenagers 1,000 years in the future. And Mon-El is one of the strangest of those because he's actually from Superboy's time. He's actually from the 20th century. And is a Daxamite, a race of beings who, when they leave their homeworld, become superpowered, but they're vulnerable to lead. Any amount of lead, even trace elements in the atmosphere, starts to poison them so that they die. And to save Mon-El's life, Superboy puts him in the Phantom Zone, and the alternate dimension penal servitude for Kryptonian criminals who are sentenced to the Phantom Zone. They become incorporeal, and they can't leave the Phantom Zone on their own. They can only be sent there by someone who controls the gateway, and they can only be brought back by someone who controls the gateway. But they don't age. They don't have anything to do in the Phantom Zone. They don't age. And so those Kryptonian criminals, including General Zod, survive the destruction of the planet Krypton because they're in the Phantom Zone when it happens. But so is Mon-El. And he stays in the Phantom Zone for 1,000 years. Sentient. Aware. Surrounded by homicidal maniacs for 1,000 years. Until this character, Brainiac 5, the Legion's resident super genius, comes up with a way to cure him. And the Legion can therefore release him from the Phantom Zone and let him take his place as a member of the Legion of Superheroes. And that is brushed aside very quickly. It's brushed aside very easily. It's the DC Comics back in the 50 years ago received many letters from small town Iowa saying, wait a minute, that's the biggest story in the world, and you're barely mentioning it. If a teenager is trapped with homicidal maniacs for 1,000 years, when he comes out, he's going to be a homicidal maniac. There's no way around that. What else is there to do in the Phantom Zone except Stockholm Syndrome? And yet Mon-El is exactly the same. He's unchanged from when he went in. I have always thought that a great Legion fan fiction story would be an alternate version of the Legion releasing him from the Phantom Zone, where they also release a bunch of Kryptonian criminals. Because it's naturally, if you're a comic book fanboy, if you're a geek, you want to know how any super team will do against a Kryptonian or more than one Kryptonian. You want to know how will they toe the line against an army of beings who are super powerful like Superman. I'd like to think that the Legion of Superheroes would handle that better than any other super team. Except maybe the original Justice Society of America, which had a couple of sorcerers on a team who could do anything they wanted. But if you leave them out, I think the Legion of Superheroes would do fairly well. But you'd have to tell the story first, and nobody did. But I remember really liking the artwork in this issue, which mostly centers on Mon-El. There is Mon-El. There he is being greeted by the Legion. And there's also a backup feature that I liked as well about Mon-El going into the Phantom Zone. So, what have we? Oh no! Oh no! All right, it's more Nexus. Oh wow! All right, this is wow. Oh man, this is space opera, and this is Act 2. It's issue number 2 of 4. This is also the landmark 100th issue of Nexus. I don't think I have issue number 1, 3, or 4 of Space Opera, and I have no idea if Space Opera has been collected. So that's a good reminder. I should lay this aside and find out whether or not I can get these issues, because I'd love to read them. I'm sure that I haven't. And this is all painted, just gorgeous stuff. See what I mean? There's Vooper. Some of you will know Vooper. No, I don't. Actually, now that I think about it, probably none of you will. Look at how gorgeous that is. How antic it is. How incredibly multi-mooded it is. You never know what you're going to get when you've got great stuff like this going on. Great artwork like this going on. Look at that. Amazing. Pure examples of rude learning from Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby was a big influence on this artist. Here we have an origin story for one of our characters. I won't get into a great deal of detail, but it shows one of the things that Steve Rude loved to do in his artwork, which was to signal to the pop culture icons that he really loved, including Star Trek, the original Star Trek. That's a statue. Those characters are ignoring it, but of course Star Trek fans are not. And there are our creators 10 years later. When they're old men, they're not the young kids from Madison, Wisconsin who actually started this whole thing. But now that this is a 100th anniversary issue, so a picture of them when they just started out has absolutely got to be in here. Let's just see if that is true. See if I'm right about that. Wow, oh wow, look at that. There's Steve Rude with Jack Kirby. Good Lord. But there's got to be a picture of them when they were boys, because they were yeah, there we go. There they are as boys. And in case you're wondering, Steve Rude is freakishly tall. But great, fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to set this aside because I want to know if I can maybe get the rest of these. I could go on Amazon maybe and get the individual issues, or I could see if there's a graphic novel. Okay. All right, this next one is a standalone issue from Marvel Comics. This is from when? When do we know when this was? We're in the cutesy poo era when you leave important information for later, so that I can't find it right away. This is from 2008. This is Alan Davis, the great artist Alan Davis, did a Thor issue where he goes back in time to ancient Egypt with his friends, the Warriors 3. He goes back to ancient Egypt and their weird pantheon, and they have all sorts of adventures there. See, there he is. Thor punching a press gang leader who is working on building the Great Pyramid. I thought it was really interesting. I would buy almost anything that Alan Davis drew. He also wrote this. I liked it. I liked it a lot as a standalone Thor issue. Absolutely fine. Again, I should put all my Thors together. So once upon a time, I'm sure they were. Oh, okay. Then we have 2 issues from the 90s. I believe these are from the 90s. Are you going to help me out here? Or are you going to be cutesy poo? 2001. 2001. This is Superboy. Not my Superboy. This is issue number 87 and issue number 91. And these are the clone Superboy who was introduced in the Reign of the Superman. The follow-up to the Death of Superman. A clone, an imperfect clone of Superman, doesn't have Kryptonian superpowers. He has different superpowers. And not my Superboy. My Superboy, I bought a comic book called Superboy forever. Forever in Adventure Comics or in Superboy. I bought it forever. And those were the adventures of Superman when he was a boy. These are different. These are after DC Comics declared that Superman was not Superboy when he was a boy. So the character's name was free, and they created a character to fill it. And I have these issues and a couple of others, mainly because of the artwork. I just thought the artwork was really, really good. in both of them. Although it's not the same. This one is Paco Medina, I believe, and this one is Pascal Ferry. But in either case, I have a bunch of these Superboy volumes. I got Superboy #1 when this series was launched. Had a different artist. I really liked it, and that was Tom Grummett, who drew a lot of those early issues, and I bought and read them all, and liked them, even though it's not quite my Superboy. And I miss the editorial freedom that DC Comics writers used to have to just write anything they want. Just go and pitch anything you want as a new series, because you have all this the vast riches of this continuity to draw from. And then Crisis on Infinite Earths, the miniseries that I was talking about, that lessened and pared away all of that backstory, made a lot of that impossible. So that what do you do right now? If you want to write stories about Clark Kent as a teenager wearing the Superman costume and having adventures as Superboy with Krypto the Superdog, you can't. And that seems limiting to me in a world of make-believe. And then we'll do this last one. This last one, and then we'll be done. This last one is awesome. It is absolutely awesome. This is from the Halcyon Days of 1974. This is a giant-sized Batman issue. This is number 259. These giant-sized issues just continued the numbering of Batman, where you get an original story at the beginning and then a whole bunch of reprints. And the original story is by Denny O'Neil, I believe. And drawn by Irv Novick. I remember it's drawn by Irv Novick. Yeah, Denny O'Neil. It stars Batman, but also the Shadow. And here we have a shootout taking place, and there's a trio of people in the background who are accidentally stumbling across it. There's a nurse, a gentleman, and a young boy. And the young boy is, of course, Bruce Wayne. And these jewel thieves are just robbing the place. They don't know that the future Batman is in the way. This is Gotham from decades ago, but their crime is interrupted by the Shadow, who appears out of nowhere, following an icy cold laugh, and starts killing these people. The Shadow did not apprehend people. He did not karate chop them. He shot them dead, and that's what he does. While these people are all on the ground, and where Bruce Wayne is being traumatized by the sound of gunfire, and that we're supposed to believe that even decades later, when he becomes Batman, that's one of the reasons why he doesn't carry a gun, because he was traumatized as a child. And the story follows. One of those thieves has recently gotten out of prison and resumed his evil ways, and the story ends with Batman and the Shadow meeting each other for the second time in Denny O'Neil's run on Batman. How wonderful. Oh, I love this, because I'm a huge fan of the Shadow. And it's hard not to see that Batman himself as a character was inspired a little by the Shadow. So the idea that he could show up in a Batman comic was just awesome. And the idea that, of course, he would be the same, that he wouldn't be any older. In the original team-up of Batman and the Shadow that Denny O'Neil did with a Mike Kaluta cover, we do see that Lamont Cranston, the Shadow, is older. But in this issue, there's no hint of age. In this issue, it's just the Shadow. You don't get any civilian identity. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. But anyway, once again, we've gone hideously long. This is your comic book video. Sorry about that. I can go on forever about these things. So I'm going to put this batch back in the long box and pull out another batch for another day. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. Good Lord. And I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.